My name is Melissa Wan, and I'm going to read from a short story, a complete story written during COVID called Joseph When It's 3 a.m. and I Still Can't Sleep. In San Francisco, everyone wants to be rich. Even we just want to be rich. Joseph was growing out his beard, like I always said he should. I'll look old was his counter-argument. And I'd said, what's so wrong with old? I guess now I had to ask myself what was so wrong with Rich, if that's what he wanted. Instead I said, and where will Rich get the planet, Joseph? But the line was bad, or he pretended he couldn't hear me. I was otherwise preoccupied with his beard, parts of which flashed silver on screen, and how it had become a treasure my body ached to find. The world was in crisis, so people could no longer go out and make money. Now people could no longer go out to make money, the world was in crisis. Where was Marx when you needed him? Locked in libraries across the country. People complained it was getting harder to rouse them from where they'd slumped. Emails arrived daily, sometimes hourly, into inboxes. Instruction manuals for how to stay motivated, chain letters, invitations to streamed talks or joint dancing or joint cooking or joint watching TV. The truth was I did not want to be motivated towards anything, and I still did not want to do anything with anyone. This morning I unlocked the hopper and poured in fresh coffee beans. I steamed very good oat milk and planned to make my own when I found the time. Find the time, said Joseph. What are you doing with it now? I don't know, what was I ever doing with it? He ran his fingers through the hair at his chin, and we sat together for a moment. Then he mentioned the German. Jenny's not too crazy about pasta these days, he said. Something about carbs. He was never much of a cook when I was around, but he tells me that she's made him up his game in favour of equality. This was the way they had phrased it. I said, give me pasta any day. And remember what I told you about your new machine, I said. Always clean it with a soft, damp cotton cloth. Yes, mother, he smiled. I was not his mother, but what could I say? I found it difficult to let this man go, almost as though he had been a son, and every morning I woke and felt his blood pump through my veins until I couldn't help but think, where's Joseph? Once in a while I found his earlobe pinched, very delicately, between my fingers, but for the most part I'd loosened my grip. After all, he was with the German now. We were all friends. This was the modern world. Sleep had built a window between us, the 8 hours between San Francisco and Manchester. This window was a screen on which, in the supreme privacy of night, I could always find him on one side and he me on the other. And so I've been asked also to answer a question from one of my fellow writers involved in Alone Together. This is a question from Philip Graham, who's a writer in the US. He says, your short fiction recounting a middle-of-the-night long-distance video conversation feels like a standalone work, but I can also imagine it as part of a continuing series of short fictions, the intimate conversations of a number of characters, which have to unfold on screens because of the COVID crisis. Is this a larger project you're working on, or might want to? Thanks very much for the question, Philip. And I think that it's probably, you've given me a very good idea that I might never actually carry out, because I've never done a longer project, and I'm not entirely sure what a longer project would look like that I would like to do. I certainly didn't intend to write actually about the COVID crisis. It's one of those things that I'm not sure can be written about directly. And so it kind of just came through in this short piece, which was written for, it was actually written for Tanya Hirschman's 5-day flash fiction course that she did for Arvon. And it was based on a series of kind of prompts, and you were encouraged to write to those prompts and within a certain number of words. And this is what came out. And I enjoy these kinds of pieces, even though, you know, I don't know what's going to come out onto the page. And part of what I love about it is the surprise. And I've just bought the collected stories of Diane Williams, and I'm trying to understand the ways in which those stories work, you know, their kind of particular logic. And I'm also trying to understand, as a writer, when not saying something is good recalcitrance and when not saying it is bad recalcitrance. And it's one of those things that I'm constantly getting wrong and constantly having to play with. But that's something that these shorter pieces kind of present me with. And it might be that, you know, in the end I end up writing lots of these short pieces which all come together into a collection, but we shall see. Thank you also to the Elizabeth Kostova Foundation as well for organising these little conversations. It's been a real privilege to take part.
My name is Philip Graham, and I will read from a novel excerpt written during this time of COVID. Here's another ghost story. Elizabeth has been dead for years when she takes her first spin in a motor buggy. She never did so when alive, and when she once refused the chance, her husband assumed her too fearful to try. He was right, and he was wrong. There are many varieties of fear. Elizabeth had worried that if she took a seat beside the driver, soon she wouldn't care less if her hat flew off and she shouted, "Faster!" exposing a part of her mind she wished to hold secret. Now Elizabeth is invisible to the living and indifferent to their opinions. On a whim, she floats to a passing motor buggy, an old-fashioned one by now, with no roof. It's only good for traveling in the best weather. She settles behind the driver and takes in the increasingly disappointing experience. The buggy rattles, the engine groans, or perhaps a better word would be growls. And worse, the driver keeps to familiar thoroughfares. He will never hear her insist, "Turn here," or "Go faster." The constraint of this fashion of travel resembles too much her former life's constraints. And Elizabeth lives in the air without regret. She can fly with greater speed and dart down any street she wishes. The narrow street she chooses curves to a quiet corner. There, a boy scrapes a fragment of charcoal against the sidewalk. He draws a face, or rather, he draws a third face, having already completed 2 others. He bends over a puddle, a remnant of yesterday's storm, and examines his reflection, and then returns to his art. Elizabeth settles in the air beside him to follow his progress. He's captured easily enough his unruly hair and thin eyebrows, the slightly crooked nose, had it once been broken, and the soft line of his jaw. But his eyes, this precocious child's charcoal, is no match for them. Those eyes have undone every portrait and forced him to start again. His emotions reflected there are too fluid to find a single resting place. No single attempt would tell the truth of him. He doesn't yet realize this. He begins a 4th self-portrait. Perhaps his persistence is stubborn labor, not struggling insight. Elizabeth is willing to wait and see. The way he worries his shrinking piece of charcoal, she believes a part of the boy knows he has to keep searching, even if he doesn't yet know what he searches for. Something important is at stake here. Hovering in a side street, she would never have walked when alive. She watches the artistic striving of a child she might not otherwise have met. And once again, Elizabeth thinks, how thrilling to be dead. And here's another one. Jake finds a love of snow in the afterlife, if only briefly. Before his heart clocked him out, he hated the stuff. Though snow caused accidents and accidents brought extra work to his garage, his dislike went back to when he was a teenager. He'd been walking through a field after a snowfall, one of those necessary walks that took him from the chaos of home, when a tingling at the back of his neck had stopped him. He turned to face a line of footprints. Of course, they were his own, but with a growing sense of horror he imagined being stalked by an invisible part of himself. It knew how to find him. Jake ran, even if he had no chance to escape those prints, and when he finally reached a side street cleared of snow, he had to gasp for air. For the rest of his life, he was the first in the neighborhood out the door after a snowfall, digging at the damn stuff until he scraped at the sidewalk. Even after he shoveled it out of the way, he hated the piles. Passing cars and sunlight turned it all into a dirty mess, as if the snow mocked his mechanic's hands hidden inside the gloves, hands that were lined with threads of grime from work, dirt that he couldn't completely remove. Soon after the start of his afterlife, Jake finds himself unable to resist floating through a patch of trees. He never thought much about trees during his life. Why do these matter to him now? He doesn't know their names, never has, but their exposed winter branches look like a road system, a map to who knows where. Then the snow starts falling. His first snow as a ghost. The flakes tumble through him, and at first Jake thinks, they're invading my privacy. He could easily fly away and escape. He'll leave no footprints. But he doesn't move. He can't move, because the snow swirling through him feels like a strange traffic. He has become an intersection, and he concentrates on individual flakes, on the beauty of their designs. The more he thinks about the whirling snow inside him, the less he has to think about anything else. And now I'm going to be reading a question by another Alone Together contributor, Melissa Wan. She asks, I'm very curious about the writing routines of other writers. Lots of the writers I know have said that lockdown has made little difference to their day-to-day routines, which continue to consist primarily of solitude and working alone. I wonder whether lockdown has changed your writing routine, and whether it might even have changed it in a way that you welcome or would like to keep once lockdown lifts. Melissa, your question reminds me of a recent New Yorker cartoon. It depicts a hapless fellow rowing a small boat in a roiling sea, lightning and dark clouds and rain above him, sharks and sinking ships around him, and the caption reads, "This is it, the time to finish your novel." Well, these days I'm finishing a novel. The 10 main characters are ghosts, existing in an afterlife I've been constructing and imagining for years. Not the easiest subject right now. How to continue writing about ghosts during the scourge of a pandemic. I found myself writing little vignettes like those of Elizabeth and Jake that I've begun fitting into the larger text. They're moments when my various ghosts achieve an acceptance of or insight into their individual afterlives. I find these moments have deepened my understanding of my characters. The frame and structure of my novel's afterlife is really just another way to plumb the possible secrets of my fellow humans. As for my current daily writing schedule, it's all about the novel in the morning and nonfiction in the afternoon. I live a few minutes' walk from a quiet cove and salt marsh that face Narragansett Bay. I'm in the early stages of writing a book about that rich space, uncovering stories about the nearby lighthouse, or the way to read water and tides, or the habits of shorebirds, or how to identify the many edible plants thriving in the marsh. Yesterday, my wife and I saw a young peregrine falcon scoop down from a great height and grab a good-sized fish called a scup from the water. In the perhaps not too distant post-COVID future, once my novel is revised for the last time, I'll be doing more walking along the cove and writing more about it.